Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. The book was written by Anne Brashares, released in 2001, and the movie was directed by Ken Kwapis and was released in 2005. So I'm just going to get straight to the book review because I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I was kind of surprised how much I liked it, but it was a bestseller, so I guess I shouldn't have been too surprised at how good it was, but I just thought the writing was amazing, and there also is like one scene in particular where Carmen is feeling guilty and then she imagines guilt as a cat. And it was just such a great metaphor and just great imagery. And yeah, I was just very impressed with the writing of this book. And then I also just loved the four main characters and each of the challenges that they had going on. And there's also just so much depth to each of them and each of their storylines. And I also just loved the bond between these four friends. And honestly, like, what's not to like, right? Because it's these four young women supporting each other, encouraging each other, loving each other. And as they experience these life-changing situations, they just learn to love themselves in the process as well. And then moving on to the movie review, I had seen this movie before, but that was back like around the time it came out. And I hadn't seen it since then. So it had been a long time. And honestly, I don't remember what I thought about it the first time I watched it, but this time around, I loved it. It was a great adaptation, stayed true to the book in a lot of ways. There are some changes, but for the most part, yeah, very faithful adaptation. The casting is perfect, which the reason I chose this movie is because I started watching Gilmore Girls for the first time, which stars Alexis Bledel, and Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants also has her. And yeah, she is perfectly cast as Lena, and then America Ferrera is fantastic as Carmen. We have Blake Lively as Bridgette, and then Amber Tamblyn as Tibby, and everyone, like, they were just spot on. So incredible. But I will say America Ferrera has one scene in particular that, oh man, her acting was amazing. But like I said, they were all just perfectly cast. They have the great chemistry, which is so vital for a story like this. And their performances were all just so heartfelt and genuine. And before I get into the differences between book and movie, I just kind of want to get up on my soapbox real quick and talk about how frustrating it is that, for example, there's a lot of like male-centric movies that people name as their favorite movie. Men and women alike will name it as their favorite. You know, there's plenty of men and women who are like, oh, my favorite movie is The Godfather or Shawshank Redemption or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or something like that. And man or woman alike, if someone says that's their favorite movie, then you're like, wow, like, okay, like you respect them. They have a good taste. But then if someone is like, oh, my favorite movie is The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, there's like a stigma against it, right? Being like, oh, like, okay, well, you must not have very good taste because that's such a chick flick and it's just looked down upon too. And it's also, you know, about teenage girls too. So I guess there's that. But still, Stand By Me is another one people say is their favorite. And that's about like 11-year-old boys or however old they are. And so it's just frustrating how there is this stigma against books and movies that are female centric, focused on all female characters and written by women authors. And just it's looked down on and it's not considered to be, you know, you don't get the respect. If you say a movie like this is your favorite movie, you don't get the respect you get when you say that your favorite movie, like I said, is Stand By Me even, right? Which is about four boys. And I'm not hating on any of these movies that star men. I'm just saying that it's frustrating that those movies, men and women alike, respect them. And if you say they're your favorite, people get it. But then if you were to say some movie like this is your favorite, you would be kind of judged for it, I'm pretty sure, right? By most people, when this movie like was so good and it has such great messages and it's about these women supporting each other and their friendship and their bond and these coming of age moments that each of them are experiencing, and like I said, also like learning to love and accept themselves, and just it was a great message, right? As good of a message as in any like of these male focused movies, right? And so I just think we need to continue to improve on not looking down on books that are targeted towards women and girls, because they can be just as good and they are just as good and the messages are just as good. So it's just frustrating how like even today I feel like we still are biased in a way and sexist in a way towards these female centered movies and things. But anyway, just wanted to say that. But from here on out, I'm going to get into the plot, which means there will be spoilers for the book and the movie. So I am going to go through this girl by girl, beginning with Lena. In the book, Lena has a sister that goes with her to Greece because they are visiting their grandparents. But yeah, in the movie, it is just Lena. She has no sister. And in the book, her grandparents went to set her up with this boy in town named Kostas. But Lena just isn't interested, and it's nothing personal towards him. She just isn't very interested in boys, kind of a thing. And she is very beautiful, and so she often assumes seems like, guys don't actually want to get to know the real me. They're just like taken by my beauty, but once they get to know me, they'll see that I'm just boring. And so she has her own confidence issues, I guess, in some ways, but she also just doesn't really care about boys at this point in her life. And then one day early on, because she is an artist, she draws. And so one day she's taking a walk trying to find something to draw. And she goes to this area with this like hidden lake, and it's just so peaceful and scenic. So she's painting, and then she gets hot. So she's like, you know what, I'm going to take a dip in the lake, but she doesn't have a swimsuit on. And so she just goes in naked and she's swimming. And then while she is swimming naked, Costas comes up and she like gets out and grabs her clothes. And so he sees her naked and she's very flustered and she assumes he followed her there. So she's just, very embarrassed and angry. And so she leaves. And when she arrives home with her grandparents, she put her clothes on, but it's all like disheveled. And so she runs inside and she's upset and she's like, Costas is not a nice boy. And then she runs up to her room and that's all she says. And based on appearances and based on the situation, the grandma, of course, makes assumptions about what had happened, thinking that, Costas attacked her. And so the grandma tells the grandpa, and the grandparents go to see Costas' grandparents, and the grandparents end up arguing and fighting. And they had been really close friends, and the whole town loved Costas. And so now it's just kind of caused this feud in the town and with these two grandparents who used to be friends. And of course, while this is happening, all this drama, it goes on for like days. And Lena does not clear things up with her grandma. She like feels horrible about the assumption her grandma made, but she's like too shy and embarrassed to come forward with the truth and clear Costas's name. But eventually she does. It just takes her a while. She finally tells her grandma, like, it's not what you think. And Costas actually is, as good of a person as you believe he is, and he didn't do what you think he did. And then later she decides to go back to that lake because she wants to finish her drawing. And when she goes, Costas is there swimming and he is naked. And so it's kind of a reversal of roles. But she realizes how he hadn't been following her that first day, but rather she had like intruded on his secret spot. And so he just showed up to his spot to swim and she was there, And so it kind of like switches her perspective on things. And then from here on out, she begins to have a crush on Costas, but she's too shy to tell him. And it's not until like their last couple nights or their last night in Greece that her sister convinces her, like, you need to go tell Costas how you feel. And so it's like their last night there. She tells him and they kiss. Whereas in the movie, so like I said, it is just Lena. She goes to Greece and she meets Costas like separately and they kind of hit it off. But then when she mentions him to her grandparents tell her like, you can't date him. Like his grandparents and us, like we dislike each other. Our family has this feud going on. Like you cannot see him. You are forbidden from seeing him. And so initially she doesn't see him, but he's kind of like, hey, if we like each other, why should we let some age-old feud stop that, So they have this like Romeo and Juliet romance going on and they're like secretly dating throughout her time in Greece. And then eventually near the end, their relationship helps like heal the decades-long feud that these two families had had. So yeah, her story is the most different, I would say, because again, in the book, the whole town loved Costas and the grandma wanted to set Lena up with him. Whereas in the movie, the grandma does not like him because she does not like his whole family, And in the book, she doesn't even kiss Costas until like their last night there or something. Whereas in the movie, they're like dating throughout her whole time in Greece. So what she like learns in her experience there is kind of the same, where it's like learning to open her heart up and learning to love and to, take chances, but it's just done in different ways in each. So moving on to Tibby, in the book and movie, Tibby's story is basically the same, where she is stuck at home all summer working at this local store. And while she's working there, one day this girl, like a 12-year-old girl named Bailey, she collapses in the store. And so Tibby calls 911 for her. And basically she and Bailey end up becoming friends. And throughout their friendship, at one point, Tibby learns that she has leukemia. And that was the reason she collapsed that one day. In the book, during like the collapse, Tibby had gotten Bailey's wallet. And so then once Bailey is back home, Tibby goes to go return the wallet. And it is when she's returning the wallet that the mom tells her like, yeah, like she has leukemia. And so she goes up to see Bailey. And Tibby is just like a very sarcastic person, kind of like, rough on the outside, but she's like a nice person deep down kind of a thing. So she had been kind of sarcastic with Bailey before, but now that she knows she has leukemia, she's being nicer. And Bailey can obviously see like, okay, you're treating me different. You're being way too nice. Like my mom told you, didn't she? And Bailey just doesn't like how people, treat her with kid gloves once they find out that she's sick. Whereas in the movie, Bailey comes to Tibby's house because the pants were delivered to Bailey's home. And so she comes to Tibby's to be like, hey, this was delivered to me on accident. And then it is through this interaction that they start becoming friends. Which, like, Tibby is like reluctantly her friend at first, but Tibby is working on a documentary where she is like doing interviews with different people in town and like at the store. And it's people that she is very judgmental towards and she thinks they're losers. And so she's being kind of mean in this documentary in a way. But Bailey is interested, and so she helps her out and she becomes her assistant. But Bailey has like a genuine interest in people. And so through hearing the questions Bailey will ask them, plus they also ask these people, you know, like, what's something you love? And then the person, you know, like one guy is super into video games, like an arcade video game. And so they take the time to like watch him play this arcade game and they get super into it. And then another lady, this is specific to the book, there's a lady who loves movies and she works at a movie theater. And so they watch a movie with her, like they have her pick her favorite movie and then they watch it together. And so by actually getting to know these people and by seeing these people share something they love with Tibby and Bailey, Tibby ends up realizing that, you know, she shouldn't be so judgmental essentially, and that these are good people who have things they love, you know, and by accepting others and having a more kind attitude and a better outlook towards other people, she therefore is able to be less judgmental of herself and just be more kind to herself as well. And with her, like her parents had her when they were very young. And then when she was like 10, they started having more kids. And so there was just this big age gap. And so in the movie, Tibby says this, but in the book, Bailey says this, where she's like, so you were like their experiment child. And they just kind of, you know, weren't ready to be full parents when they had you. But then 10 years later, they were ready to actually be, you know, full-on parents, and that's when they started to seriously have children, you know, and so Tibby just kind of struggles with that in some way. But yeah, in both, by the end of the book and movie, Bailey ends up dying from leukemia, and in the book as well, Tibby had a hamster who also died. And so she kind of like wasn't ready to accept either death, but the hamster death was wrapped up in Bailey's death as well. And so one reason the hamster's death was so distressing was because she was also having to deal with Bailey's sickness and impending death as well. But yeah, by the end, she is able to kind of like be at peace with the death of Bailey, and just having known Bailey just helped her to just become a better person ultimately in the end. And then also the book had this side story about how there was this guy from school that Tibby had been into, but Bailey is like, what? Like, what's the big deal with him? Like, he's not that great. And then by the end of the book, Tibby realizes like, yeah, like she's right, he's not that great. And instead she kind of starts having a crush on the arcade video game guy, whom Bailey said was a quality guy. And then to move on to Bridgette. So Bridgette goes to a soccer camp in Mexico for the summer, and in both she falls for one of the coaches. It is this 19-year-old guy named Eric, and Bridgette in the book is 15, but she lies and says she's 16, whereas in the movie she's 16, but she lies and says she's 17. So she's just full of energy, and she's a very like athletic, talented person, and she's very flirty with him. And once she like sets her sights on him, she's like, he's mine, I'm gonna get him. And she also decides she wants to lose her virginity, and she's like, it's gonna happen this summer with that guy. And ultimately, the two of them do end up having sex, and she says how, like, you know, it went as good as she could have hoped. Like, it was a good experience, and yet she just feels very empty afterwards. And a big part of her story is that her mom struggled with depression and ended up committing suicide. And so Bridgette is always moving at top speed in order to never let herself feel down and feel sad. And so she's seeking all of these outward things to give her happiness and fulfillment. And, you know, sleeping with Eric was something where it was this outward thing that she thought would help her feel fulfilled and feel full. But then after it's done, she realizes that it didn't change anything, you know, and so she just feels even emptier, and she just goes into this depression in both book and movie. And Eric is a nice guy though, and he does tell her, you know, like, I'm sorry, it's my fault. And like, she was coming on strong, obviously, but he is the older one, and yet he still just kind of went with it. And so he takes responsibility, being like, you know what, I should have known better. You know, you seem so mature, and it seemed like you had done this before, because she just exudes confidence, you know, and she was being so flirty. And so he was like, yeah, I just kind of assumed that it wasn't your first time. And so I'm sorry that it just happened at all, right? And in the book, he says this to her at the soccer camp shortly afterwards, whereas in the movie, they go home, and then he shows up in her hometown, and he tells her this, you know, he apologizes, and he's like, hey, when you're 20 years old, maybe we can meet each other again, and this can actually be a relationship. But in both, while she is still at the soccer camp, she like is feeling sad and depressed, and she writes to Lena expressing this. And in the book, Lena had a layover in New York on her way home from Greece. But once in New York, she instead switches flights, and from there she flies to Mexico. And so the book ends with her arriving in Mexico to help cheer Bridgette up. Whereas in the movie, she receives Bridgette's letter, and then she calls up Tibby being like, hey, like Bridgette is home, because at this point she was already home from the soccer camp. So she's like, hey, Bridgette is home and she needs some cheering up. And so Tibby and Carmen go see Bridgette and help cheer her up, and she is able to just open up about the hurt she feels about her mom. And then on to Carmen. So Carmen lives with her mom and she sees her dad just a few times a year, but this summer she's spending the whole summer with him and she is so excited to just get this one-on-one time. However, after she shows up, she realizes it won't be one-on-one because he has a fiance and she has 2 teenage children of her own. And so Carmen just feels like an outsider and she feels like the odd one out, and this family just isn't very welcoming. And then she's also half Puerto Rican, whereas this family, they're like these white blonde people, and so she just feels like an outcast and an outsider. And the dad also doesn't do a very good job at helping her feel more included too. And so it gets to the point where she's just had enough and she kind of has this outburst, and then she runs off. And while she is gone, she's like, you know what? My dad is probably worried about me. He's probably looking for me. Like, I should go back to the house. And so she goes back to the house and she sees the dad isn't worried, apparently, and he's not looking for her. He is enjoying dinner with the family as if nothing happened. And this whole time she's felt just invisible. And this just furthers that, right? Because now that she's gone, it's like the dad doesn't even notice. And so she gets upset and she throws a rock through the window. And then from there, she gets on a bus to go back home. And I was totally on Carmen's side with this because, yeah, her dad and this family, they were just being rude, and like she needed to stand up for herself in some way, right? Throwing a rock through a window might have been excessive, but like it didn't seem to be getting through to them. But she also, she also has a hard time admitting to herself that she is angry at her dad. And since she can't even admit it to herself, she isn't able to talk to him openly, you know? So anyway, she's talking to her mom and Tibby, and this is when she realizes, like, why can't I admit that I'm mad at him? And so she ends up calling him up and just like being super honest and explaining it all to him. And this was such a great scene in the movie. Like, I dare you to watch this movie and not cry at this part, because America Ferrera just gives such a heartbreaking performance with this phone call with her dad. And yeah, it was just such a great scene. But yeah, so by the end, you know, all of them are back in their hometown and it comes time for the dad's wedding day. And so in the movie, it is all the friends that convince her, like, you need to go to your dad's wedding. So they all go to the wedding together and they're sitting there. And then during the ceremony, right as it's beginning, the dad notices her in the audience. And so he pauses the ceremony. So he has her come up and join them. Whereas in the book, it is Carmen's own decision to go to her father's wedding. And she goes alone and she sees the ceremony, but she's like in the back and not noticed. But then after the ceremony, the father sees her and he makes sure that she is included in all of the family photos that are taken. And their relationship just improves because they come to a place where they're just more honest. And when you're more honest, you become closer. And so she ends up being closer to her father in both book and movie by the end. But the magic of the pants, obviously, like in part, is the fact that it fits all of them perfectly despite their different body types. But also, like, the reason the pants have an effect on them over the summer is that when they wear them, they are reminded of their friends and of their friends' personality traits that they themselves don't have. For example, when Lena is wearing them, she thinks about Bridgette and how Bridgette is just like so open to love, right? And she's always putting herself out there and being vulnerable. And so Lena is like, you know what? Like, if she can do that after she's been hurt, you know, with the death of her mom, then I can do that too. And that is when she decides to just be open to a relationship with Costas, for example. And she stands up to her grandparents in the book. In the movie, when she's like, hey, like, I like him and I don't care about your family feud, you know, whatever. And then with Carmen, for example, like, she was so like timid and not saying anything about how she was feeling when she was at her, you know, dad's house and the fiance's house. And when she has the pants on, she's thinking about Tibby and how Tibby is just like unapologetically herself and she says what she feels. And so it helps Carmen be like, you know what? I'm going to stand up for myself and I'm going to say something, which is when she has like that outburst while they're trying on bridesmaids' dresses. And so yeah, the pants just help connect them to each other, and it just helps them to feel inspired and empowered and to channel the positive energy and the love they have for each other. And then when it comes down to book versus movie, so yeah, this is a very faithful adaptation. Like I said, the biggest change is the Lena storyline, but honestly, the Lena storyline in the book, it was kind of frustrating because she just lets her grandparents assume the worst about Costas for like a number of days. And it's like, man, just say something to your grandma. Like, just say it and get it over with. But she waits so long, and so it was frustrating. And so even though the Romeo and Juliet romance romance was kind of cheesy. Ultimately, I do prefer the movie version, I think I would say. And then as far as the others, like, there were some things with the Carmen storyline that make me want to say I like the book version better. But at the end of the day, the other three storylines are just very true to the book, and they didn't make any big enough changes, you know, that made a difference, really. So at the end of the day, I'm going to have to say the movie wins because it is such a faithful adaptation. It stays true to the book, stays true to the spirit of the book and what all of these girls learn over this summer. And the acting, the performances are amazing. The casting is excellent. And I just really loved watching this movie and reading the book, honestly. They were both amazing. And the book I would definitely recommend to everybody, regardless of your age, but it is kind of targeted to a teenage audience. So I think if you do have a teenager, this would be a great one for them to read. And it's just so many great life lessons that you can learn from this book, you know? So yeah, I highly recommend both. I loved them. But overall, I'm just going to end up saying the movie wins, I think. And I do plan on covering the second book in the series, which, by the way, this is also just so perfect for summertime, right? Because these books take place over summertime. So yeah, I'm going to be reading the second one. I have it on hold at the library. So once that comes in, I will read that and do a book versus movie for the second one, which I'm very excited for. So you can look forward to that in the future. And that wraps it up for the first book in the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants series. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Comment your thoughts down below on if you have read this book, if you have seen this movie. This was Blake Lively's first ever performance, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, she was great. She was only I think 16 when they filmed, so she was pretty young. But yeah, everyone is amazing in this. I absolutely loved it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, give my podcast a rating and review. And if you want to support me monetarily and get exclusive content, you can become a Patreon for as little as $3 a month. And it would mean so much to me. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.